All right. Okay. I think I'm here. Let me make sure that y'all see me and then we're in business. Uh, okay. All right. Okay. I think I'm here. Okay. Okay. All right. We're in. You hear my baby? Yes, you do. Okay. Let me take this page. I'm going to actually turn this off. Take this page, pop it over here, get a couple different windows going. I think we're going to have a good thing going here. Where the heck am I? Okay, here we go. I'm not going to get to questions till after because I'm reading the stuff that Lee and them put together. So here we go. Welcome, welcome. Chapter 2, chapter summary, part A, pages 42 to 52. Thank you for being here. And we're talking about the nature of suffering, which is a very light subject. And I'm excited because this is actually like, this is kind of the nitty gritty. This is the nuts and bolts of the Rise and Shine body of work. And if you get this, you will liberate your energy and do really well in most things that we talk about for the rest of life. And if you avoid this, then you will constantly be searching for answers outside of yourself. So there's a great summary that runs on the page. If you don't have the page, it's on. You can just get it through the Facebook link. If you go to Facebook, you'll find it there. And I'm going to go over to the questions, and I'm going to do one last check-in on the discussion page, make sure we're good. All right, cool. Yeah, and for those of you who heard my little guy, he is very linguistic, I gotta say. Okay, so discussion topics. First question. Many wonderful books written on the subject of Buddhism. Can I recommend some, please? Yeah, I'll chuck those up on the Facebook page, given that it'd be hard to do here. But, you know, I think that there's some, like, kind of the fundamentals, like Herman Hesse, Siddhartha, and all that. And then I think the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying is fantastic. I'll pull a reference for that. That's going to be too much to talk about here. Page 42, the Buddha story. When people saw the transformation, this saw the transformation this awakening had visited on this young man. You also say he was born into an aristocratic family and didn't know poverty and distress. So how could he have known suffering, like perhaps some of the others had, and therefore had a transformation? So Gautama Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, was a rich kid, and he was being transported from, like, you know, the palace to the summer palace or some crap like that. And he did the unthinkable, which was he peeked through his little transport carriage, or probably one of those things that people just carry you on, because if you have enough poor slaves around you, that's how you roll. And he looked outside and he saw just this dirty, impoverished, crazy circus of a world. And he questioned his parents and said, "Hey, what the hell is this?" And they're like, "Oh, you know, that's our kingdom." He's like, "Well, what's wrong with those people?" He's like, "Oh, you know, they're poor." He's like, "Well, I don't get it." And so they're like, "No. You're a prince. You're not supposed to think about those types of things. Eat your caviar, right?" And so he had a glimpse of something that burned its way into his retina and into his brain, and he couldn't let it go. So what he did was he had to know, and so he snuck out of the palace and walked the streets, disguising himself as a pauper, seeing the suffering and seeing the false, the facade of the existence that he had been led to believe is reality. And he couldn't reconcile the two, and so he renounced the world and became a monk and basically let go of all worldly possessions and basically committed his life to finding the answer, because what he thought was reality had been so shaken up. So he went from riches to rags to nothing, and that's what he sought, was the annihilation of the ego. And he went through many a trial and tribulation on his path and journey there, until he finally decided that he's going to sit under a Bodhi tree and not get up until he had figured out the answer. And if he didn't figure out the answer, he would die trying. And that's when he finally had his first pow. And so, yeah, the Buddha gave it all up because he saw the facade and saw through it, and wondered, then if this isn't life and that is real life, and it's all about all this suffering, then what's it all about? What's the point? It really made him ask the big questions, and got him to be a pretty cool guy. Eightfold Path number 2. Do not attach to worldly things. Please define worldly things. Does the Buddha mean our children, spouse, etc., or more like material goods? So there's a classic distinction between householders and ascetics. And the Buddha had renounced his connection to the material world, and he had committed to becoming an ascetic, which essentially means, I don't care about money. I don't care about anything. I'm going to beg for food, and my life is going to be, that of a monk, that of a renunciate. Now, in the Hindu tradition from hence he came, there are ascetics, which are the monks that shave their heads and go off and do the stuff that they do, and then householders, which have women and children around them, or have men and children around them, and have agreed to carry on lineage and be parents and be model citizens in our community. And the path of the householder is one of being a righteous person, not doing people harm, being a righteous person, supporting the greater good in the community, supporting the ascetics as they come through, and helping, make the world a better, more stable place. That is actually the fundamental distinction that I think has been misrepresented in the world of nouveau spirituality that's hit the West. And that's a big piece of my next book, because most of us on this call are actually householders. And we've got mortgage, we've got rent, we've got car bills, and we got stuff. And so having not renounced money and having bills, we have a different deal with the universe. And so we need to understand that. So when we talk about material goods and not being attached to worldly things, I've got worldly things all around me, but I don't care. What I care about is love, family, shelter, survival, and my message. And so the rest of the stuff is just convenient, but it doesn't define me. And that's really the point, is that the worldly things are things, and it's not evil to have them, but it's the desire, it's seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, if you want to cross genre over here. And that really becomes it. So children, spouse, house, car, those things are necessary for the world of the householder, but they don't necessarily bring happiness. So if your attachment is to having a bigger and bigger house and a bigger car, you're suffering. So I think we've covered that point enough. If there's more, I'll hear about it in the chat thread. Life is filled with suffering, and this is the cause of our ignorance. What about when a child dies, for example? Surely that causes suffering. Are you saying that ignorance is because we cannot accept that they are gone from us, but back still connected to the source of energy, or that we shouldn't be sad for ourselves? Or should we be okay with it? Well, there's a very big difference between being sad due to the loss of a child and clinging to that sadness because now we identify with something other than that moment and that pain. So Buddhists cry, Buddhists mourn, Taoists cry, people cry. It's just natural. So losing a child is horrible. Now, Are you grieving for the loss of that child? You missed that child? Sure. But is part of your identity clinging to being the person who lost the child that people now need to be sorry for? That's suffering, right? Is part of your identity tied to this somber person who life doesn't work out for? That's suffering. So, what narrative have you drawn, and what emotional roadblocks have you drawn upon to keep you stuck and suffering? Because again, it's never the event, it's our relationship with the event, it's our clinging to the event, it's our wanting more or wanting to avert, right? I want that child, I want that child, I want that child. The child's gone. So that sucked. But now it's time to mourn and move on and honor their spirit versus what do I need to do? I need to get another child, I need to get a puppy. I have this infatuation with needing that child back and not letting go of that moment in time where history changed and there was a loss. And so that's the suffering. That's the challenge. And that's the distinction that the Buddha made in that line of thought. Excuse me. The Judy story and the attachment to the issue. What's your advice when others close to you try to engage in this and try to pull you into the dialogue? See archive call reference. You say, sorry, I'm not getting involved. Yeah. I say things like that all the time. I said, hey, you know what? I'm not really interested in entertaining this conversation, so I'm sorry. I just can't. I don't really want to talk about this, and just stop them there, or in a concrete example, like, hey, can you believe he said that or she said that, and I'm a jerk, you know what I mean? Like, I don't care. I don't need people to like me, so I'm just like, yeah, I'm not really. That doesn't do it for me. I don't really care. I don't like talking about people, and I'll just neutralize it and stop it and say, look. You're not going to find what you're looking for here, so that conversation isn't happening. That monologue may be happening, but I'll walk out of the room, right? And just let them have it. And you can be as polite as you need to be, but the moral of the story is what I just said: is stop. That's it. That's a boundary, right? Now do it as politely as you need to do it. It's easy to just say, just let it go, but how really? Is this the first step perhaps recognition that you've done it, experienced a reaction? What about desire to wallow in a bit of grouching, i.e. this is a bad mood and I'm not ready to give it up yet, even though I know that it's silly? I think it's more along the lines of this is an interesting mood. What is it? What does this mood feel like? Where do I feel this in my body? What was I doing and what was I feeling before this mood came up? Oh, that's interesting. I remembered that person owed me money and didn't pay me, and when I emailed them, they ignored me, and now for the last hour I've been really in a bad mood. Interesting. Okay, so what do I need to do to engage that person, and what do I need to do to not let that affect me downstream here? And so it's more about understanding that there's a feeling, whatever that feeling is, and really kind of tracing it to a place in your body and tracing it to an event maybe, and seeing what triggered it, and kind of understanding why that might have triggered it, so that you understand the why of what you do and the how of what makes you kind of fall into these eddies of stagnation in the river of life. So now we're talking about the craving scenario with Judy. What if you are the Judy, the spouse who looks to you for love, e.g., a spouse looks to you for love, reassurance to fulfill their self-worth, reinforcement of love for them. But sometimes, like Judy, that well is dry. I guess you could say that if the spouse, is in your life garden, then you need to water that flower from the well. So it becomes about priorities. No, not exactly. And I want to be very clear on this distinction here, because feeding someone's insanity is never good for them. If someone is on the floor bleeding, I am the first person there. But if someone is standing there talking about some bullshit, trying to get attention from some childhood drama that they're playing out, my feeding that is empowering the beast. I'm putting energy into the energy deficit that is, it's like the parasite in them is what I'm feeding. So be careful. Don't mistake love and kindness for codependency and that sticky, yucky, disconnected, childlike drama that a lot of us hang on to, that we feel obliged to fulfill in each other. So that, to me, instills a dialogue. Hey, spouse, I know that you say you want this one thing, but what do you really want? And just help bring them to light, right? Help bring them to a conscious awareness and a level of understanding of what's happening there, so that you really cut through the bullshit and get to the core, the crux of the matter, which is usually, I don't feel loved, I didn't get attention, I didn't get this, I didn't get that. And then you could help have an authentic dialogue and really broach the subject with them. But I would never feed the cancer. So I hope that distinction makes sense. On page 47, we feel things we don't want and must force ourselves to move to the opposite side, run away from failure. People don't like these sad feelings. What do you suggest we do with them? Sit with them, acknowledge it, and move on. People eat when hungry, physical response. People look to something to make them feel happy when sad or down. Emotional response. Is this about making the right choices? So go into nature instead of having a glass of wine, kicking the cat, or eating another bowl of ice cream? Partially, but this is actually a great question because it kind of illustrates the crux of what we're talking about in this chapter. So I want all of you to kind of go back and understand what's happening in this question is what's happening with humanity. Is you're asking me effectively, if I feel something that I don't want to feel, what do I need to put my energy into to avert that feeling and self-medicate with something that might be a healthier swap? And what I'm saying is, sure, that's helpful, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is stopping and saying, what is that feeling? What is that sadness? What is that emotional response? And being with it and not running from it, and allowing yourself to feel what it feels like to not put energy into running away from this negative charge, therefore not putting energy into the opposite, which is the whole thing about this chapter. So I really want y'all to go back and reread this chapter in specifically with this question in mind, understanding that this question is effectively still feeding the energy drain. Okay? And we'll talk about that next week. But this is a very important distinction, is what we're talking about here is healthy swaps for aversions. We're not talking about healing. And what this chapter is getting at, which is really a challenging chapter for a lot of people, you don't feel like I'm dissing you here, is that to truly come whole is to stop running. So the walk out in nature is still another form of fleeing from that emotional feeling that we feel is so overwhelming, instead of stopping and breathing and finding it in our body and really metabolizing it and being okay with it, and really deflating the energy bubble of that which has been haunting us for years. And the follow-up is, I want to make sure that I understand, you create charge that feeds on your vitality, whether you can get your mind off that pain or whether you identify with that pain. The charge comes from running away from the pain. The charge comes from wanting more of something that you deem desirable. Putting energy into that want, putting energy into that desire, or putting energy into wanting to get the hell out of there. That's what creates these bubbles of dissonant energy which haunt us and drain us of our vitality. Is polarity a necessary part of the cycle of suffering? Here's how I understand it. When you identify with pain, there's no polarity created. Can you just keep feeding the charge, right? Not exactly. So when you acknowledge the pain and stop averting it, you don't create the polarity. Therefore, the event comes and it goes, and it doesn't create this other charge that you then keep empowering with your own life force. So as the event comes, you learn to maintain what we call equanimity and balance. And in that balance, you don't like triage it and be like, is this good? Is this bad? Do I want this? Do I not want this? Is this in or is this out? Is this good or is this evil? That's what our brain does every second. And so that's what creates the charge. So if you just say, what is this? Or this is, and now it's different. That's where you sit in equanimity. That's where the freedom is found. I recently became aware that attachment to pain and suffering may be the source of lifetime self-sabotaging behaviors keeping me from healing from chronic fatigue syndrome. What can you tell us about attachment to pain? It sounds like such a perversion. Is it common? What do you do with it? Just observe it as much detachment as possible? How do you not judge yourself while feeling it? Basically the same, which is, where's the pain? What does it feel like? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it tingly? Breathe into that body part. What is the pain telling you? No, 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 no. Don't move away. What is the pain telling you? Breathe. Stay with it. Stop running. What is it saying now? Where is it? Is it warm? Is it stabbing? Is it dull? Oh, it moved. That's interesting. Where is it now? The more you stay with it in the present moment, the more you can acknowledge it for whatever lesson it has trapped in there for you. And the more you can avoid running away from it and turning and coming to it and breathing life into it, the sooner the pain-free life that you deserve will be there for you. I've dealt with a lot of chronic fatigue syndrome, and the people who get what I just said walk away. It might take a minute, but that's the way out is in, right? The way out is in. What about this concept of events being stored in our DNA and being passed from previous generations? This is a pretty huge concept. Sounds like what contributes to our personality. Yes and no. We can shift our DNA. The language of DNA is really the language of consciousness, and you can, if you could tap into your consciousness, you could tap into the encoding of DNA and shift it in a very powerful way. The shamans do it, the Taoists do it, the Buddhists do it. So yes, we inherit some of these memes. We inherit some of this thought form in its crystallized kind of matrix. Some of it nurture, some of it nature, coming from our folks. A lot of it's more nurture and like modeling. But yeah, we have things stored that then we have an opportunity to heal generationally. And that becomes a really powerful place for us in life to be able to step into the unraveling of ourselves so that we can at least in the first bit of this, not pass it to the next generation, but really just the buck stops here, and find that place where we realize that we're not a victim. You hear my kids screaming downstairs. That we realize we're not a victim, and that we are in the driver's seat and in control of how this emanates. And the more we tap into our higher self, we realize that we are not this or who we think we are. And then letting the wisdom of the true I, the true self, drive and align our personality with the universal DNA, clean up some of the faulty memes, and kind of unravel into the more pure emanation of who we are, and kind of bang out those dents, work out those kinks, and I think that's achievable in a human lifetime. What if the issue is no longer important to you, or you don't believe so? Say from childhood is the whole, let your adult version of yourself talk to your child version and say it's okay. So an example would be conflict as a child, didn't like it then, still don't like it, the emotional baggage can be a guide perhaps, unless it takes too much control over your life. Yeah, I mean, look, if you've healed it, you've healed it, but if it's still tripping you up, then you got to go there. And that's what timeline therapy is about. That's how we kind of turn our psyche and our awareness and our consciousness in to the essence of whatever happened then, and really see what pain and suffering lessons that we've latched onto that are probably not serving us anymore, and using that as the lead, if you will, into the alchemical gold to really transmute that experience into something of love, greater consciousness, greater acceptance, and more humanity. So if it's gone, then it's gone. But if you keep remembering it, or if you find versions of it showing up, if you keep meeting people that remind you of the perpetrators and all that, then there's breadcrumbs to follow, and there's clues there. And I recommend that you don't leave any stones unturned. And I didn't say this was easy. I just said it's good for you. Last question, page 52. In our modern society, we have somehow equated the lack of chaotic strife and incessant noise with lack of drive and initiative. Get out of your own way and see what drive really is. It comes from within and is effortless. Please talk about ambition. Go verboten to a Buddhist. I think universally inspired ambition is the most powerful and beautiful thing in the universe. And what I mean by that is get the hell out of the way and really make your ambition the ambition of service to the greater good, and let it work through you, and then you will move mountains. What do you want, a Maserati? You want a purse? Do you want to show those people from junior high that you're better than them? That's the petty stuff, right? I want to solve childhood hunger because I care. I want to help endangered species and bring back the rhino because that matters to me, right? These are examples. And those are things so much bigger than you. So every time you feel like you want the accolade, every time you feel like you need to be like the recipient of some sort of like attention, get the hell out of the way. And the more you do so, the more the universal power can move through you, because it's not your ego stopping the flow, and you become an agent for the greater good, and you use that wave, and you ride that wave, and you enjoy that wave, and you just, that's your dharma, it's your karmic yoga. And so that drive is a beautiful drive. Look at Dalai Lama's in my town right now. I just missed his birthday because I had some other stuff I had to do. But that dude is constant. The guy's got all kinds of ambition. What's his ambition? To help humanity and rid it of its suffering and spread the message of peace and happiness and love around the world. The dude just turned 80 years old. He doesn't need to work. He's got a lot of ambition, and he's the most famous Buddhist we got. So it really comes from stepping out of your own way and making the why bigger than the you, and tapping into the greater I, and not making it about you, is the best way I can answer that. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the chat thread for a minute. We're out of time. I just want to see what the hell's happening here. People get addicted to grief like crazy, Leela. Thank you, Lee. Um, what about if one feels mental, physical fatigue, but know that if they use tyrosine, they can be resolved? The real issue or biochemical issue. Lee, that question is a valid one, and as a physician, I would say whatever you can do to bring balance to your body, do it. But are you running from emotions, or are you psychologically tired because of neurochemistry? And that's a delicate balance, and I think that that's a valid question, and I'm happy to kind of entertain that question as we go along. But really, I take tonic herbs because I got a baby and another one coming, and it's exhausting. And so, you want chi, you want energy, but the point is to engage. If I find myself being angry with my son, there's no tonic that fixes that. That's just me having a short fuse. And then I got to look at that short fuse and say, okay, what is this? What is this? And really engage in that in a way that is of service and is meaningful. So thank you. Next week, pages 52 to 59. Lee will post it on the Facebook page. Thanks again, Lee, for actually and in very articulately and beautifully putting this stuff together and supporting us with this. And it's good to be back home, and it's good to be with you guys. So I'm out of time. I'm gonna go hang out with that kid who's yelling for me, and sending you all love, and I'll see you next week.